Alright, so now we're in the second half of this cloud drawing demo, and I'm gonna actually try to render a few clouds, and I'll show you what I'm using. I'm just using one of these little water brush, a couple of watercolor. I'm particularly doing watercolor because I think that might be the trickiest for a lot of people, because you're painting white clouds on what is presumably a blue or reddish orange background, and it's going to be hard to have the translucent white appear on top of the background color. So I'll show you 3 different techniques that I'm going to work around that. So yeah, you need watercolor. You also need some opaque paint, something like acrylic or gouache. I also have with me a little container for clean water and dirty water, and a sponge. I'm going to use the sponge for the background. First off, for the sake of time, you'll notice that I've masked off some clouds that I've made with scratch paper and taped it down. I already have 2 of them made, so that's a little bit faster. I'll show you how to do the last one. And the way I'm doing this, I'm making the bottom curve slightly, kind of like how I talked about making that dramatic, larger than life look for the clouds. So again, I'm gonna cut this bottom and have it curve slightly. It's easier if you start from the smallest clouds that are farthest away and then work your way up to the larger ones, because if you start off with the larger one, at some point you're going to find that it's really hard to make the really small clouds. Okay, so I cut the bottom so that it's curved, and then for the top part, I'm just going to tear into it. I'm just going to tear into it. If I'm doing it slowly, I have a little more control. I could give it more shape and make it a little more organic. But if I wanted to taper off at the end, I could go a lot faster. And I'm going to have this overlap the other clouds a little bit. And I'm just going to use my tape. Tape the 2 ends. You also notice that when I'm doing watercolor, I tape my paper to a board. Some people like to tape it to the table. I don't like to tape it to the table because then I can't move the paper around if I need to. But the reason we want to tape it to the board is so that when the paper gets wet, it doesn't warp and stretch as much. So this is the method to mask off clouds, and that's good for clouds that are like the stratus type, where it's one long layer. And then we have our other clouds. We have the cumulus clouds, which if you need to, you could draw the lines in a series of small bubbles and big bubbles. You can stack bubbles up, and then you can form your clouds based on the shape of those bubbles. And I'll give it a little bit of tail just to signify some movement. If you feel comfortable, you could just kind of go right ahead. And just kind of draw the outline. Again, the clouds are going to get progressively smaller and closer to each other. And on the top layer, I'm going to draw the wispy clouds that I mentioned earlier. So we have the cirrus, the cumulus, and the stratus. Now the first thing I'm going to do now that I have it roughly penciled in there is I'm going to mix in my color. So I'm just going to get a little bit of water. And I'm going to mix a little bit of blue and a lot of white to get a nice sky blue. And I want the paper really wet, so I want a lot of water here. I like using a sponge because really my brush is a fairly fine brush. So I find these sponges work really well if you see them as a paintbrush sometimes. I'm going to lay down a wash. Oops, went a little overboard there, but that's okay. We'll fix that. Again, I'm going to lay down a wash. The thing is, it's hard to be precise with the sponge, but you could lay down a lot of color really fast, which is good for the background. And over here, where there's too much color, I'm going to pick up some of that color. I'm just going to drag it down. And I want it to fade to almost white at the very bottom. So what we're trying to do is just get a nice smooth gradient. And these bottom ones now, I should be able to peel them off and get a nice set of clouds. Yeah, this one's too big, but we'll correct that. Okay, so now we can just go back and pick up a little bit of this light blue paint and just go around the cumulus clouds. So this is the second method. We have the first method where we mask it off. The second method is just simply carefully paint around it. It's really important to test your colors beforehand, otherwise you end up going too dark like I did here. But if you go too dark, you can just add a little more water. I'm just picking up some of the excess color here and moving it around a little bit, painting around these clouds here. Now you may be wondering what I'm going to do about the parts where, you know, I went a little heavy-handed with the sponge and painted too much there. What you can do is you could basically clean off your brush and add some more water, and then I'm going to go back in here and just add a little bit of water and just push it out. You can even use your hands, kind of wipe some of it off. Finger paint. It is a little tricky because watercolor is transparent, so it's hard to paint over anything, but you can use water to kind of erase things. Now the last cloud that I'm going to do, I'm actually going to use my acrylic. And I'm just going to put a dab of acrylic on the side here. I kind of painted over the original lines for the cirrus clouds, so it's a little hard to find where they are. So I'm just going to paint new ones. And again, it's easier to start from the smallest ones. And don't worry if the lines aren't like very visible, because right now we're just kind of outlining where they belong. Just going to draw a line for where I want the clouds to form. And notice how the lines get progressively wider. Each one I'm getting a little bit further apart from the other one. And from there, now I'm going to start drawing these little wispy clouds. And this is where brush stroke kind of is really important. You just want to give it a flick of the wrist to give it that wispy feel. So I'm just going to follow the contour of this line that I have to draw these wispy clouds. And the reason I start off small is because it's easier to make things bigger, right? Like right now, they're spaced further apart, so I can make these clouds bigger to fill the space. And wherever the line is, I try to stay on one side of it and really let the brush kind of fade into the sky. And then where it starts to fade back here, I'm gonna kind of blend the colors together a little bit. All right, so now that we have the general shapes of these clouds, we want to give it a little bit of shadows. I'm going to mix in a darker blue, black. I'm just trying to form a nice bluish gray. Add a little bit of shadow on the underside of these clouds. And this is why I like to have this on a board so that I can easily move it around. Now I want to draw a shadow on the underside of it. So I'm going to actually flip the board upside down, start adding that shadow. So I'm quickly kind of putting on the shadow on the underside of all of these clouds first, and I'm kind of just spreading the colors out. And we've been having the sunlight coming from the right side, so I'll continue that trend and have the clouds, each of the bubble, form a bit of a shadow. So I'm kind of looking for the darkest part, and then just kind of using water to thin it out. Okay, so that's the cumulus clouds. And really, it's not that different for the stratus clouds. Again, I'm starting with, make it a little bit darker. These are typical rain clouds. Too dark, too dark. Just gonna extend this out, because this one overlaps the one behind it. I want a well-defined bottom shadow here. So that's what I'm doing first. Getting that shadow. And this last one, you know, is so far in the background that it might just kind of blend in. And now that we have those dark bottom, we could just kind of stretch this out. You might want to give a nice brown feel to round off this image here. Okay, and there you have it. I'm gonna call this a day. There's my 3 different types of clouds. That's it for this time. If you want to see more of my show, you should subscribe, because I post very irregularly. And you know, like my videos if you don't think they suck. So that's it. See you next time.